Thanks for that, Adam. Well, comes to my, I know a lot personally of my own suffering kind of comes from a place where, like, maybe I feel like I'm not good enough, and that if I do certain things or live in a certain way, that maybe that will change. Do you have many people coming to the center with similar issues, and how do you help them along with this?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I'm sure Jim, it's kind of like a very pervasive, often unexpressed and undiscussed thing that a lot of people carry around, which is feelings of being not good enough or inadequate, or maybe carrying around feelings of hurt for a very long time in their hearts and never really processing any of that. So basically, the challenge is then we're always trying to be better. We're always wanting to be better because we feel we're intrinsically not good enough. However, even when we do things that are somewhat, somewhat huge, like maybe we do some kind of really successful project and stuff, and everybody's saying, you're so good at that. Still in our hearts, we never feel we're really good enough. So if I can just explain where that kind of comes from.
Yeah, please.
Basically, we all carry that in our hearts, these various thoughts and feelings about ourselves and about life. But largely, we don't really examine that much. So what happens is, at some point in our life, we become familiar with these thoughts and feelings of not being good enough. Maybe, something happened when we were young, or maybe just, when we were a teenager and we felt quite insecure. And then what happens is we become familiar with these thoughts and feelings of not being good enough. And then what happens is we're not really ever processing that. We're just becoming more familiar with it. And at some point, we just start to grasp at that sense of self as this is me, believing this really is who I am. And then over time, we start to establish our self-identity on the basis of these thoughts and feelings that we now feel so familiar with. And of course, because of that, then everything that we're doing is coming from that sense of self, that perspective on ourselves. Now, this sense of self, we're largely unaware of it. It's what I would call below the line. You've maybe heard this analogy before of above the line and below the line. Above the line is, for example, all the thoughts and feelings you're familiar with. Like, I'm thinking I need to go to the shop. I'm thinking I need to do this project. I'm thinking I need to buy this thing in the shop. But what's below the line is really our sense of self. We're really not very familiar with how we're relating to ourselves as we have all these thoughts and feelings. So what happens is we become very familiar with this sense of a limited sense of self and an idea of ourselves that feels quite not good enough. Then we start to live our life from that perspective. So we're constantly trying to serve and protect this limited sense of self. So we're constantly trying to be better. So one day we feel we're not good enough. But because we're so deeply identified with this sense of self and we feel this is intrinsically who we are or inherently who we are by nature, we never actually feel good enough. So no matter how successful you are, you never really feel you've done enough. And then often when people say criticize us or, people don't appreciate what we do, we feel even worse because we feel they're just reinforcing what I always really knew to be true. Now, the danger with that is you live your whole life from that perspective, believing in some way that's true. And this view of ourselves is largely unconscious, meaning we're not necessarily consciously aware of it in every moment, and it's largely unquestioned. And what Buddha taught is, if you check, really those thoughts and feelings you have about yourself are simply thoughts and feelings. They're not actually who you are. But because we're so familiar with them, at some point we begin to believe they're true. They're just stories we tell ourselves about ourselves so often we actually start to feel they're true. But in reality, they're just stories and they're just thoughts and feelings. Now, in Buddhist meditation, what you do is you begin to unpack that sense of self and you realize that solid sense of self that I've been so identified with for so long isn't actually who I am. They're just thoughts and feelings I've got very familiar with and grasped that to be true. And then you begin to release that and let that go. And then what you discover is something extraordinary about our nature, which is, in truth, our nature is pure potential. We have the potential for peace, for happiness, for good qualities. This is our true potential, our true nature. And that's the journey within Buddhist practice, is discovering this ordinary limited sense of self that seems to be driving all my thoughts and feelings and actions all day long is not really who I am. It's just thoughts and feelings I've become so familiar with. I begin to believe they're true. But as we unpack it in meditation, we begin to let it go. We start to become free of it. And then we have this whole new perspective. We start to see our potential. And we start to realize we've always had this extraordinary potential within us. And so you can see it playing out a lot. I remember the story of Robbie Williams saying when I think he played Flaying Castle some years ago, and he said, I walked out in front of 80,000 people screaming my name, when he was at the height of his success. And he said, I walked out and there was all these people screaming my name and just, absolutely adoring me. And he said, I've never felt so depressed. I've never felt so depressed because deep down, no matter how amazing people tell you what you are, if you're holding on to this deep sense of I'm not good enough, you just feel it doesn't make a difference what anybody tells me, I'm still not good enough. So the problem with that is you never feel like you're getting where you need to get. Like even if you're constantly trying to improve yourself, you never quite feel you've got there. So a lot of people carry this in their heart. And then what they do is it just becomes the kind of basis upon which they live their life. But the hopeful message that is contained within Buddhist teachings is you can see there is no fixed self. You can actually begin to see there's no fixed self. There never was a fixed self. There's only a you or a me changing moment by moment, independent upon what we think and feel. So as we begin to change our thoughts and our feelings and begin to see things with more wisdom and more compassion, we begin to move beyond those limiting perspectives. We begin to relate to the truth of our pure potential. And then you start to realize I can become whoever I want to be, and so can everyone else. And so there's always hope for humanity. We're not these ordinary, limited people that we seem to believe we really are. In fact, we're full of potential. And all of Buddhist teachings and all of the Buddhist meditation practice help you to fully actualize that pure potential, to become that more loving, compassionate, kind, fearless, and so forth person that we all would prefer to be. And so that's kind of the journey, explained in a practical way at least.